Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome everyone to a very special session with Usuli, a conversation with converts. My name is Grace Song. I'm the executive director of the Usuli Institute. I'm a convert of 28 years, and for as long as we've been doing these conversations, I've wanted to have a very unusual conversation with converts because I feel that there are exceptional converts that have come to Islam, and oftentimes when I find these videos and conversations with converts, it's often just a tell me your story. And I didn't want to just do a tell me your story. I wanted to actually have a conversation that humanizes converts. And I have my own sort of working theory, which is that the people that God selects to be converts at this very difficult time to be Muslim are truly a gift to the community, to humanity, and they have a superpower. Like every single one of them has a superpower, and every one of them has a potential purpose to move Muslims forward. And so today I am very blessed and excited to have a wonderful conversation, inshallah, with my two dear friends, Joe and Witzke. And they definitely fall into the category of exceptional with superpowers. And, you know, I thought that I would start by just saying, you know, I've thought about like what to title this conversation, and so maybe this will give some insight into what I'm hoping to achieve. But the first is, you know, of course, exceptional converts, which is a little bit boring. Grace and friends, yes, of course. And maybe likely, unlikely converts, because if you think of people who, when you get to know them, would likely be the most beautiful, smart converts if you believe in our Usuli approach that Islam is beautiful and reasonable and humanistic, that these are exactly the type of people that would likely be converts. But if you meet them on the street, they are the most unlikely converts. So I thought that was a potential title. And then, of course, the brilliant or insane, which was one of the things that Dr. Abul Fadl said to me when I first met him and told him that I was a convert. And he said, you know, converts today are either brilliant or insane. And so if you're trying to impress me by telling me you're a convert, I'm not impressed. So, so it's one of my favorite stories. And also, interestingly, you know, when I ran this idea by Joe and Witzke, one of the suggestions was, oh, I know a great title, Perform for Me, Convert, because I think that is oftentimes the experience that converts have. And so I was hoping that this conversation would, number one, just shed some light on the convert experience, and, you know, allow people to see what exceptional people actually do come to Islam. And we'll get into exactly why I believe these guys are exceptional. And, you know, hopefully to just share this experience, humanize this experience, because certainly as converts, I think, you know, we know that probably the fastest thing you can do to either ruin your reputation or you know, announce to the world that you're insane is to say that you've converted to Islam, especially in this day and age. And that's simply not true. I think that, you know, these guys are, well, both are, you have a PhD and you are on your way to having a PhD and SJD in law. So, you know, and they're people that are on the front lines of humanity. So hopefully after this conversation, people will think twice about dismissing converts for being something that they're not. So anyway, I wanted to start, and I just first to say, you guys, you know, don't feel any pressure. I know, like, the whole thing, oh, tell me your convert story. That's always like the first thing, right? And, you know, it's of course important to know, because I think people are curious, like, you know, if you are smart, normal, you know, you're not like completely, you know, abnormal in some sense, or, you know, like, why in the world, why in your right mind would you ever think about becoming Muslim? So, I don't know, I can throw that out there if anyone wants to say anything. I can give a little bit of background. Maybe you can just introduce yourselves, and I'll shut up. I can go on forever. So, Joe.
Might be good to start just by saying like why I don't share the convert story.
Absolutely.
Like, and another title you said perform for me convert. I think when I was giving my intro to the Asuli event, it was actually like dance for me convert, which was a bit harsher. When I first converted, I think it was 7 years ago now, 2015. I did share my story a few times when people asked, but then I kind of picked up on a few things. Firstly, it's a very personal experience, and a lot of times the people that were asking me were kind of strangers. You know, you just bump into someone in a mosque and it's, oh, tell me, oh, why did you become Muslim? It's actually a very, very personal story, and so that's one. Second reason was a bit more prosaic. You know, I just got a bit tired of saying the same story ad nauseum, I think. Thirdly, and this was the real reason, after sharing the convert story a few times, I started to pick up on the dynamics as to what was actually happening here. I started to feel like I'm kind of being a bit fetishized, objectified. Used would be too strong, but utilized would be right. I started to see the kind of confusions and insecurities within the Muslim community, and that my role as a convert could be kind of like a sticking plaster, you know, 5 minutes of relief, you know. Which then, as soon as I picked up on that, I started thinking, for a time, I was like, okay, I need to make the story really good. You know, somebody's coming up to me, and I need to make it, you know, really moving and powerful. And if it's not moving or powerful enough, and you know the person I'm talking to isn't moved enough, I'm going to start feeling guilty. You know? And then I had to take a step back and go, whoa, this is so unhealthy. This is just. So it's much easier just to say, no,
don't
thanks.
do it.
Yeah.
I don't tell my story.
Why did I become Muslim? I mean, I never expected to become Muslim. You know, I don't know about Whiskey or yourself, Greg, but I kind of hear from a lot of converts that there's a certain trope of kind of, you know, I was looking for answers, I was disillusioned, I was unhappy, and then I found my answers in Islam. That wasn't me at all. I was actually very happy with my life. You know, very typical 25-year-old guy having a good time. Thank you very much. It was just an academic interest that, you know, in the words of like my mum and my family, kind of got out of hand. That spiraled, in spite of myself, to a conviction. Undergraduate became masters, became learning Arabic, became PhD. All of a sudden, I found myself reading the Quran in Arabic, and in spite of myself, I didn't choose this, being really impacted by the voice of the Quran, the authorial voice, what the Quran was saying and how it was saying it. I didn't choose to feel that. It's almost like, you know, if you fall in love with someone, you don't choose to fall in love with someone. It chooses you. There's no rational reason why I fall in love with this person but not that person. So I'm reading the Quran in Arabic and I just start feeling things. And so the real question behind am I going to become Muslim was really, am I prepared to accept these feelings? I feel this way about this book. I actually remember thinking to myself, God, does that make me Muslim? Does that mean I'm a Muslim? And it's like, I don't really want to be a Muslim. I'm actually quite happy with my life. You know, thank you very much. I'm all right. You know, I don't need this right now. C.S. Lewis. I mean, I love C.S. Lewis. When he converted to Christianity, he called himself the most reluctant convert in Britain. And he was I mean, it probably sounds contradictory, but when I read it, I said, I know exactly what he means. He goes on to say, and when I read this really impacted me. Think of the beauty and the majesty and just the humility of the divine to accept a convert even on those terms. Like I was going and kicking and screaming and begrudging and kind of like, I feel this way, but I really like my lifestyle and I really like my. It took me 3-4 months. I was feeling this way about the Quran, but I was resisting it. And so it took me 3-4 months to finally accept I feel this way. And that was it. That was my entry in. So a reluctant conversion.
Wow.
Sorry, I feel like I've hugged the mic.
No, that was great. So, but from start to finish, like how long did it take from the time you sort of, sparked your interest to the time you actually converted?
Academic interest in Islam was about 2011, 2012. Conversion was start of 2015. But, so my formal Shahada was 2015. But by September, October 2014, I was feeling things.
Okay,
I was reading the Quran and being impacted. So we're talking 3-4 months
Wow.
of reading the Quran, being moved, really moved, impacted, putting the Quran on the top shelf, treating it, and then questions. Oh God, does this mean I'm Muslim? 3-4 months of kind of before I had to accept. I feel this way. I feel this way about this book. It's had an impact on me, and I just need to face that fact, and then take the plunge.
Amazing. And did you think about, like, when before you took the plunge, did you think about, like, okay, what are my family and friends going to think, and how is this going to change my life, and what does that mean, and how did you deal with some of that?
That's exactly what was going through my head. Yeah. Half of it was, what about me, like my life? I don't, the data. It's not just a change of belief. It's not just a change of ritual. It's a change of everything. It's a change of lifestyle. It's a change of, do I see myself as? But the other half of it was, what my family going to think?
Yeah.
My mum's not chosen to have a Muslim son. My brother and sister don't choose to have a Muslim brother. How are they going to react? What are people going to think? How do I explain it to them? How do I explain to them a process that I'm still kind of figuring out?
So did you tell them right away?
I told my mum before it happened, but I didn't tell anybody else for a while after. I think I kept it to myself to kind of wrap my own head around it. So I took the Shahada and I told my mum, but it was a few months before I told anybody else, and friends and family.
How did your mom take it?
It's funny. She wasn't hostile. I mean, you hear horror stories of some converts' families. Alhamdulillah, none of that. She didn't welcome the idea. And I remember the line she kept saying. She kept saying, "Can you not just convert to Catholicism?" My mum's not Catholic. She was just like, "Why can't you just be Catholic?" Or we weren't religious. Why can't you just be Catholic? Which itself is really revealing. Like, she obviously didn't have a problem with beliefs, but there was just something about Islam.
Yeah,
It's like Islam was just the image
Right.
of foreign, other.
Yeah.
Catholicism was almost like, home territory. I can handle it. You want to be religious, fine. But I remember saying to Mum, it doesn't work like that. it just doesn't work like that.
And
But-
2015 was also, like, after 9/11 and the rise of Islamophobia, and
So I think my first Jum'ah I attended was immediately after Charlie Hebdo. I think
wow.
that's how I measure it. So it was a real kind of baptism of fire. Yeah. My first few months was the whole freedom of speech. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I'll never forget the kind of, why can't you just be Catholic? I thought, what do you say to that?
So did you know any Muslims before you converted?
Yeah, but it was the actual conversion was really a kind of very personal journey. I met good Muslims, I met good non-Muslims, but there wasn't. It was a very personal journey. Yeah, it's amazing that kind of, why can't you be Catholic? It's really revealing, like what it says about how Islam is seen. It's not about doctrinal beliefs.
Yeah,
You want to be
yeah.
religious, so be religious. You want to believe in God, believe in God. But just Islam was something.
For sure.
Why not something a bit closer to home?
Yeah.
Yeah, for my parents or my mom, it was very much like, well, why do you have to convert to anything? Why can't you just be a good person?
Mhm.
And again, the fear, absolute fear of
Yeah.
Islam, and I think my story is probably much more extreme. I'll share it later.
From what I remember trying to explain it to my mum, saying, "Mum, you can't help how you feel. If you fall in love, you fall in love. I feel this way about this book. I didn't choose it. But I'm just trying to be true to myself and honest with myself. That's the real question. And you wouldn't want your son to hide his true feelings."
Yeah.
And so that worked.
Alhamdulillah.
But it's also, it's alhamdulillah, my family experiences were broadly supportive, kind of. But I was very conscious early on that, as I just said before, like, my mum didn't choose to have a Muslim son, my brother and sister didn't choose. So I was like that, yes, it's my journey, but I want to bring them along as much as possible. I knew that for my mum, if I was to change my name, change my dress, change,
Yeah.
that would be real.
Yeah.
So I wanted them to see I almost felt for the first few weeks and months I had a duty to show my mum, you know, it's still me.
Exactly.
It's still your
Mhm.
son. I'm still
Right.
Joe. Nothing's changed. I don't drink wine anymore, and I don't drink bacon. I don't eat bacon, and that's about. Hopefully, I'll be a better son. But there's that mental block of foreignness
Exactly.
Mm.
that I wanted to.
Yeah.
Right.
And so now looking back, do you feel like your mom, like, if she, how does she feel, and does she feel like, okay, this is still my son, and actually he's better, you know, he hasn't appeared in like, you know, Arab clothing.
I hope if I've done my job right, I hope. I mean, only she can say. But what I have picked up on is there's an element of when your son becomes Muslim, for my mum, she now cares about Islam and Muslims a bit more. She'll hear
Mhm.
people bashing Islam, and she'll get a bit defensive. She'll be like, no, you know,
Yeah.
which would have never happened before.
Yeah.
It's almost like she's now got skin in the game and she cares,
Right.
which is something quite beautiful. You know, Islam's gone from being kind of a foreign kind of can't you just be Catholic to something like no.
Yeah.
It's almost like if you knock Islam, no, that's my son you're talking about, no,
Right.
which is quite nice.
That's beautiful. So, Iski, I'm going to ask you again, because also, you know, I think it's interesting, you know, you guys are both, you know, white Europeans, so I think also as white European converts, it's a very different experience than if you're African American or you're Asian, you know. So, and I think you hold more sway within the Muslim community because, you know, there's this dynamic of if you're white and you've converted to Islam, it's almost like you validated, you know, this religion for us, and you become sort of a superstar. We have a lot of experience with people in, you know, obviously, in Muslim consciousness that, okay, this is the white convert, and it's like a rock star, you know. But so I'm curious to know, like, what was your experience? Because it's different, you know, obviously within a mosque, within your family, and, you know, just all of that. I don't know if you care to
Yeah.
talk about your experience.
I mean, I can definitely relate to a lot of what Joe has been saying, and what you're saying is absolutely true. In my experience, this idea that the white convert, when performing this narrative, of conversion that is affirmative of the truth of Islam,
Mhm.
is very much honored. But as soon as you try to step anywhere out of that role, it can be a bit challenging, right? So you shouldn't. You're there to affirm, but not to question.
Mhm. Yep.
Wow, yeah.
And and that can get a bit suffocating sometimes, and not saying that, not in any way wanting to compare, or but that is the shadow side of that honoring of the white convert, which of course is still a very different experience from also what I've heard from friends, black converts to Islam in the Netherlands, who just get completely different kind of questioning. Their
Yeah.
story is not regarded as something affirmative,
Right.
but rather something that should be questioned, or so yeah, it really shows that racism, that white supremacy in quite an ugly way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How does that reveal how Muslims see themselves? I mean, this is where the convert can play a really crucial role. Like, what does the celebration or the fetishization almost of white converts reveal
Mhm.
about how Muslims see themselves?
Yeah.
The white convert just by being there is already is really kind of revealing. I agree. I agree as well. Like, white privilege is real. Like real. There is a kind of other side to it, where we were just talking about this earlier before we started. How, you know, if you're a white Muslim, you're almost seen as too much of a novelty to be a real Muslim.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, yeah, you're asked to talk about your experiences of conversion, and yeah, you're celebrated, and yeah, you're festive, but at the same time, you're not seen as really
Real
Muslim.
Yeah.
We can't get past the white to see the Muslim.
Yeah.
So, and there's experiences of kind of a bit of exclusion at mosque, of being, there's certain cultural barriers, but my overwhelming experience is one of overwhelming celebration, fetishization, privilege. But there is that.
Right.
There is that other side.
But I think that that also is pretty typical of the convert experience, because it seems that, you know, people are not aware that they don't think everything that a convert needs to go through to make this very, you know, massive decision. Like, I think converts are always talked down to. It's always assumed that you don't know what Islam has to say, and I feel like Muslims have no problem coming in and telling you what Islam is, as if you're starting at ground zero. And like, no one actually, and this is the thing though, is that no one really understands the convert experience except another convert. But if you think about, like, okay, how many hours did you have to actually invest in learning, you know, what, okay, number one, what is this religion about? But, you know, in all of the questions that arise just from Islamophobia, but then your own, like, you know, I had the same experience, like, okay, I love what I'm reading about this faith, but I can't see myself as Muslim. You know, what does that mean? And like, how do I deal with that? And how do I tell my family? How do I tell my friends? They're going to think that I'm crazy, because, you know, I certainly had my own, you know, preconceived notions about what it meant to, you know, to be Muslim, or, you know, Islam. Aren't these the guys that blow things up, you know, and kill people? How could this be this beautiful religion? And so I felt like it took me like 2.5 years from the time that I started thinking about Islam to actual conversion. And I would say like the vast majority of that time was spent like undoing all the like negative baggage. It wasn't that I had a problem believing in what the theology had to say, but I had to undo, or, you know, find answers for all the things that it was like, okay, yeah, but what's the catch, right? Yeah, this is beautiful, but then why does the rest of the world think that Islam is so evil and Muslims are so horrible? Then, you know, what am I not getting here? And so that is, I think, a part, it has to be a part of people's journey, especially now when things are so horrible and so dark, you know, for Muslims. That Muslims who are born Muslim don't think about that process that converts have to go through. And that's a lengthy process, and it requires a lot of introspection, it requires a lot of just sheer research, you know, prayer and all of that. And if people actually thought about that, then they wouldn't just come to you and talk to you like you know nothing, you know? And so it's this interesting irony that we probably know more from, you know, a research book, you know, reflective, whatever, than people who are just casually, you know, born into the faith and don't ever think about it. But we're talked down to all the time. So, not well, you know, that's at least my experience. I don't know if that was your experience as well.
Muslim-splained.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the one side to it, where we can say like, okay, I think on a general basis you could even turn this prejudice around and say anyone who has made this decision to become a Muslim, they must have done something to find out about Islam, something
Mm-hmm.
to, I think, quite a lot of research, but
Yeah.
you know, want to keep it open for the people, because there are some people who are just so touched or so moved, and then that becomes their reason for conversion. But I think they're the exception,
Yeah.
especially in
Yeah.
this time.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, it's through constant confrontation with your own prejudice, and having to actively work through that for quite a while before you can take that decision. But then I feel like on the other side there's also this, because I heard you say born Muslims could never truly understand, and I think there is a part that born Muslims can never truly understand. But then one thing where I don't really like the division we often make between converts and born Muslims, in the sense that I am invited to share my story, but we're acting like a born Muslim has this static line of faith that just ever since they were born, and you know, their dads whispered into their ears, it was just, that's it, ready for Jannah, set.
So cool.
That's
So
really
I've tried for a while in this process of trying to see how am I going to deal with these questions. I tried for a while to just ask it back, right? So whoever it was, so what's your convert story? I'm not a convert, no, but like, why are you Muslim today, right? Because all
So
of
true.
the prejudice we have to work through, born Muslims are faced with, oftentimes, especially speaking as a white convert, more so than me in society.
Yeah.
They're the ones getting the questions. They're the ones getting confronted with all of this prejudice, racism that's out there.
Definitely.
So for a Muslim to stay Muslim, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
it's
never
a-
going to get stopped at an airport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm never going to be racialized.
So true.
I'll say, when I say Muslim, I'm met with surprise, not hostility.
Yeah.
I can never, I can listen and try and learn and empathize, but I can never really. So converts, there's a lot of humility on our part. White converts,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of humility. We have a lot of listening and learning to do
Yeah.
as well. You know, the idea that Islam, sometimes this happens and we don't even realize it. The idea that Islam is a good religion because white people can be Muslim, it's just white supremacy
Mm-hmm.
through the back door.
Absolutely.
It's just, that just, before you
Yeah.
even realize it, there
Yeah.
you go. So yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Iski was.
Yeah.
And adding to that, if I can, there's then, so that's the white supremacy, more as a genderless kind of thing. Both men and women, we both experience this. But then there's this fetishization of white Muslim converts. I've had too many messages, specifically by men, saying, my type is white Muslim women.
Oh my God.
Specifically saying that.
Wow.
In finding some sort of a way to have these deeply racialized beauty standards and enter them into Islam, which then creates hostility among women, among Muslim women, because
Yeah.
the white comfort suddenly becomes a sort of a threat,
Yeah.
which also just shows how that white supremacy works
Yeah.
in these Muslim spaces, and it's truly, truly sad. It's
Yeah.
so sad.
You know, and this is, I think, where, you know, like when I think about my experience, everything came through the filter of like education and questioning. And so when I actually met Muslims for the first time and I went to the mosque after I converted for the first time, I sort of assumed that everyone there, you know, like knew everything and that they were, you know, like
Yeah.
they knew the secret that I was looking
Yeah.
for my entire
Mhm.
life. And then very soon you realize that it's kind of like all of my, you know, like my Christian family, or, you know, people who just sort of, they say they're Christian, but they've never opened a book about anything, and they just assume. So, you know, part of my frustration is, you know, in meeting like Muslims like that who have never invested any time in understanding their faith, have always accepted it as a cultural practice, an ethnic practice, you know, I know everything because this is what my parents taught me. And I found that so frustrating, and also the source of all of these kinds of issues, right? Because it's like, if you understand what Islam is supposed to be, there's no place for that. The racism, you know, the preference, and so, and then to be told that, oh, let me tell you, you know, as if you know nothing, it's like, okay, this is wrong. And so I think that may be also why, you know, I felt so strongly about this whole education, right? So, and I feel like we meet so many born Muslims or heritage Muslims that I feel need to go through this convert experience, right? and that's the key to unlocking. But I think that also to get to the point about, you know, why born Muslims can't understand the convert experience, I feel like their convert experience would by necessity be very different,
Mhm.
because they have to sort of disentangle the culture and the, you know, the ethnic heritage from the faith, which is probably conflated, and they have to deal with kind of a lot of the, you know, whether it's ignorance or backwardsness about, you know, Muslim faith, or what they think is Muslim faith or Islamic faith. That's a very difficult exercise. You know, it's like my whole family has always taught me that the men should be the ones that are served by the women. You know, how is that not Islamic? You know, it's like, well, you know, let's separate that out. And that's its own challenge.
I mean, I think I can just hook into what Joe said, because one of the things you talked about was how there's this expectation of this dramatic narrative where maybe you're going all out in the wrong direction, and then alhamdulillah you see the light and you change your life around and everything changes from that moment on. And I feel like that's one of the expectations, and maybe it doesn't always feel like that for me either. But there's another expectation I struggle with more, or a specific question that I feel like we often get as a convert, And for some converts, this is a really easy question to answer, and then for others, it's difficult. It's a question, for how long have you been Muslim? And I struggle with that question so deeply, like up to like an existential level. I struggle with that question. Because I mean, maybe it relates to what being a Muslim is for me, right?
Yeah.
So, for me, being a Muslim, just bringing it down to its essence for me, relates to this idea of surrender. So, surrendering to the will of God and surrendering to truth and finding truth in that surrender, or finding peace in that surrender. And I think that there are definitely times after I have become Muslim, got the label, where I wasn't living up to that. And I think there have been times before I was labeled that maybe I did a better job at that.
Interesting.
And I feel like I understand the necessity to talk about Islam and about Muslims as, you know, someone belonging to that group and having that label. But for someone to ask me, for how long have you been Muslim? I know for some people it's like a birthday, right? So that's the day I got my certificate. From that day I've been a Muslim.
Right.
But that just feels unnatural to me. Maybe also because I chose to not have that moment at the mosque to say my shahada to get a certificate.
Do you have a certificate?
No, I don't have a certificate.
Have a certificate.
I don't have one either.
No.
It's
But
not
I love-
formal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love you said that you took your shahada with the trees, right? Is that
I did.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then even the shahada, I feel like we've made shahada into this one moment where you utter these words and then you're done.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, everyone has a different journey, but I was praying before I said my shahada. So I said my shahada many times before I said my shahada.
Right.
And I think for me personally as well, this shahada is not just a moment you get done, you did your checklist, you're now Muslim, okay, that's one pillar fulfilled, worry about the other ones. No, it's like every single day, you know, every single day I either say my shahada or I say whatever else. My body either testifies for or against. And I just, when someone asks me, for how long have you been a Muslim? I'm like, I cannot even confidently say I'm a Muslim now. I know I'm trying, right? I know I'm trying. But I just did something that did not testify for God. So this whole idea of having this one moment where you say your shahada, all your sins are, phew, that's it. Welcome to Jannah. It just,
Which is not true.
it doesn't, yeah, no. But I feel like it's often perceived that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, it also just relates to the fact that it's been such a process for me.
Yeah.
So you said you took a really long time. It took you 4 months.
Yeah, 4 or 5 months.
I dare to argue that's not a long time.
That's not a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I dare to argue that.
Yeah, that makes sense. 4 months, it felt like a long time, but 4 months of deep down knowing you believe that the Quran is revelation, but just denying that. On a day-to-day, that 4 months feels a but.
Yeah.
What must you do when people say then, how long have you been Muslim for? You just like have a bit of a...
I say how many Ramadans I've fasted,
Okay.
or I say how many years I've been praying Salah, but I don't say how long I've been Muslim. It makes no sense to me. I cannot. I mean, so, or I will say the Ramadans. I usually say the Ramadans.
You need to have a shot, because that question is even more common than how, tell me your story to Islam. Like,
Yeah.
how long have you, is the question.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that your answer just now is so humbling. It makes me feel like I don't think I understand anything.
No, but it's it's just a
so
different
beautiful.
It's a different
Um,
level of how we're talking about Islam
Yeah.
and what Islam means, right? So
Exactly.
I think it's just, I think we've become so used to talking about Islam as one of the many religions, one of the options you can choose, and then okay, give me green, I'll give the green, right?
Right.
I really went to interfaith meetings where we all have a color.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's the image that stays in my mind. But
That's funny.
I think if you're, from my perspective, looking at it, Islam is not one of the many, right? Islam is like the underlying
Yeah.
roots of it all. And then the question makes no sense.
Yeah.
It depends on what we're talking about.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Absolutely.
The question is asked on a kind of formal sociological level. Like how long have you been in the Muslim community? But then you're thinking on just the primordial.
Exactly. Which is amazing.
Yeah.
This is like what just blows my mind and really humbles me. I think that is such a beautiful answer. The answer, yeah, like when you talk about primordial Islam, I feel like that's like on the one hand, it touches me so deeply because I recognize it, and I feel like, okay, that's the connection to the truth. And then it makes me feel that I'm not doing something right because I'm on the ground here, and I will very quickly say, oh, I've been 28 years Muslim, But that's what but I recognize that's so beautiful and so divine because that is the goal. And I think that that's also what most people will not even think about or recognize until they hear it like articulated. So I'm like so happy to hear you say that, and I feel like this is what Islam has always been, is just this beautiful layer upon layer that just gets more and more beautiful as you meet other people who understand it at a much deeper level than you. And this is what's exciting to me because this is the power, I think, of converts, and we all come at it from different places, and then we have something to share, but we don't. There's no limit, right, to your understanding of what this can mean, and so part of like what I wanted to do with this conversation is, you take these converts who have literally been, in the skies and flying and thinking about life and what I call sort of like divine idealism and humanism and like what possibilities can be, and then you come to the Muslim community, and they're not thinking at that level, and they tell you, no, don't ask questions, don't be flying out there. Islam is very simple. It's right here in a box, and it's black or it's white, and so when I feel like, okay, at this moment when things could not be darker for Muslims, and I'm always thinking about, okay, how do we push things forward? How do we get out of this place? And then I meet these incredible converts that God has selected with superpowers from all different sorts, and it's like, okay, these are the people that God has selected that can come and make a difference for all of us. So shouldn't then converts not be like shoved down into a box? And we have to come together at some point, because obviously heritage Muslims have so much to offer in terms of tradition and I'm not even sure exactly how to articulate, but heritage, I mean, it's history, but it's like converts are the new blood and the new ideas and think, the people that can come help take flight. So I think, I
think the way Witsky was just describing Islam, though, surely on that level, that's how heritage Muslims can try to see themselves as converts.
Mm-hmm.
Because even converts, we ourselves, I've been Muslim since January 2015. It's almost like the real difference isn't between convert or heritage, but mulk Muslim or malakut Muslim.
Yeah.
And when you see Islam in the primordial sense,
Mm-hmm.
then almost these barriers of born Muslim or convert Muslim, they kind of recede into the background.
Exactly.
And it's kind of primordial Muslim
Yeah.
or sociological, like
Yeah.
my formal social identity.
Absolutely.
That's where these barriers kind of blur away, and they can become a real bridge between convert and heritage. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But like also, where do you, like I feel like the primordial engagement you've had, since even you said like from the time you were a teenager even, right, and younger, like that's a really beautiful, pure connection that oftentimes gets sullied, right, with life experience. And so a lot of times we come in contact with, Muslims that have forgotten that primordial part even exists. And then they're so like, obstinate about, no, Islam is this, right? And so I feel like, okay, maybe the way you release that is through the education, through, I'm not sure exactly what I'm saying, but it's like, how do we
preserve that spark?
Yeah, and make people believe, because we've come to the point now where it's like Muslims themselves have ingested so much Islamophobia, and they don't have resistance because they've forgotten the primordial connection. They've kind of lost connection with the Quran, which is intended to be, right, like that line to the primordial, and which is what we're trying to teach, through our halakas and whatever. I mean, it's a challenge for us to even convince people that the Quran has anything to say to them, that has, anything of value for our time and our age. But, so, I mean, maybe this is a good time to say we have to be sort of creative and, come at it in an unusual way. And one of, like, Witzke's superpowers is music, right? It's like, where's the guitar?
Where's the guitar?
That was such a good bridge.
So we're getting the guitar.
So
That was a
true.
great.
Yeah.
That was a
segue.
great. Also a transition into
It was
Yeah.
so smooth.
How long have you been rehearsing that?
No, it just came to me, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
But these are the things that are like surprising, right? How do you connect to primordial except through? I mean, music is so powerful, and I think even divine experiences that are not, like sometimes people just log heads when it comes to like, oh, let's get in a debate about this, that, the other thing. It's like you're not going to get anywhere that way, And so how do you break through? Or so that's your superpower. Joe's superpower. Like, okay, this is like our new book, right? This is the manifestation of your superpower, which I mean, you were joking that your superpower is organization. Well, it's much more than that. It's language. It's it's getting the whole understanding and presenting it. And so this is like one of the most beautiful books that I think exists today on Islam. And we can talk more about that, but not anybody can do that. And so this is like trying to reach people through reading and the power of ideas, right, which is really important for our time.
Is that what Whiskey said, that post-formal conversion, there's been times when you didn't feel it, but yet before, it's almost like every convert has a spark. That spark is what gets you to start, whether formally saying Shahada or feeling, and the question is, that spark, is it gonna be nourished and nurtured and become a flame,
Right.
or is it gonna be snuffed
Exactly.
down? And nothing can snuff it out like your own whims, your own egos, like your own experiences in the Muslim community, which I'm sure we can talk about, your own hostility. Lots of things can snuff it out. But if that spark gets, what's the word I'm looking for, nurtured.
Yeah.
Is that what you do with the spark? What do you do with the spark? You rustle it up, what?
You flame the fire,
Yeah,
right?
fan the flame, yeah.
Fan the flame.
Yeah, that's when you become, that's the primordial Islam.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow, Whiskey, you've
Can-
really got me thinking.
Should we take you had said that you would share your gift with us by performing. Maybe this is a good time to do the Shahada song?
We're going to have to do the song so many times. So many times.
And it never gets old.
The second time, it's not even Asr.
A lesson to future people coming to the school: if you have a talent, don't share it.
Don't say it.
You will be asked to repeat it.
Play guitar for me, convert.
That's the title right there. Yeah, okay, so this song, it's called Shahada, and it's it's called Shahada because it has the Shahada as its lyrics, but also because when the moment came for me to say my Shahada, what the meaning it had to me at that moment was, when I say my Shahada, it's a confirmation for me that I want to stay on this path. So it wasn't necessarily an affirmation of belief. I mean, of course it was,
Right.
but it had been that for a while. But for me, it was more, okay, saying my Shahada means even when it's gonna get rough, I'm gonna find a way to stay on this path. Like a final commitment or something. And I think this is where I relate most to what you said about, you know, this feeling of dread, just like, no. I really still, I mean, it's coming up now, but I felt that, I had this feeling in my stomach, that really this, like, how can, I think it was just fear, honestly. I think if really boiling it down, it would just be fear. Fear of not being able to live up to whatever that would mean, or fear of what everyone around me would say and think and do, and if I would be strong enough to deal with that, because that was one of my biggest fears, because I mean, no one likes to.
So it's fear of the unknown for me.
Yeah, yeah, that is why you're right.
A new chapter in life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I remember having that fear, but then the night I did actually, I said it. I said my Shahada with this intention. So this one particular Shahada I said after Maghrib prayer, when I was reciting Surah Ar-Rahman in prayer, and something about, I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes when you recite Quran, it lines up or something. It lines up with what's happening around you. So you feel like this idea of all of the world around us being the Quran, being a Quran, kun fayakun, spoken into existence, right? And I was reading Surah Ar-Rahman. I was done with my prayer, and the sky just looked like Surah Ar-Rahman. I cannot even really say it, but it was so beautiful, and I don't know, I just, the fear was gone. I was like, heck it, whatever. Shahada. Okay, this is the worst way to put it. Anyway, so then I said my Shahada, but it was just, I didn't tell anyone, it was just me saying it. It was a cloudy night, and the clouds, honestly, they were like dragged out clouds, you know, like, I told a friend, I even took a page of the sky I took a picture of the sky that night, because I felt like it looked like Arabic, the clouds, because they were so dragged out, you know. So I felt like, almost like, okay, subhanallah, if God is literally putting the words for me in the sky, then how arrogant do I need to be to not read these words, right?
Yeah.
And then the funny thing is, I took a picture and looked at it the day after. It doesn't look anything like Arabic. It doesn't look anything like Arabic. So yeah, I don't know what I drank that night, but anyway, gotta deal with the consequences.
That's the picture that you have on your YouTube video.
No,
right?
that's actually from, I think, the morning after, when I went to the
okay.
to the lake that's close to my home, and just thinking about everything that had happened, and reflecting, and that's when the melody came for the Shahada.
Oh, wow.
So that's the melody to this song, and I didn't do anything with it for a while. Then when I decided it was time to come out to my family, I first had conversations with the people I felt I should have a conversation with, and then after a while I just I did a Facebook post. It's like, here it is for all of the people that that do not know yet. There's gonna be Muslim content coming. Now you'll understand why. And the song, I harmonized the melody and I put it under it with the post. And then only much later, earlier this year, I worked it out into a full song, and that's the song. So there's some other words added. Oh, sorry. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله 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 وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. I testify by heart and eye, by the tears I cry, I'll no longer deny the blessings in my life that are too numerous to count. My heart I thought was lost, but in your mercy it was found. So from this moment onward, yeah, Hadi, be my guide, till even my darkest darkness is just a shadow of your light. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, 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 wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I witness, I see you are the sight beyond my eyes. I witness, truth has become apparent beyond lies. I witness, the many different names have become one. I witness, returning back to where we had begun. I witness, I see you are the sight beyond my eyes. I witness, truth has become apparent beyond lies. I witness, the many different names have become one. I witness, returning back to where we had begun. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, 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 wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah.
Thank you so much. It brings me to tears every time.
What's your guitar sweet?
What?
Is that okay there?
Yeah. And now Joe will dance for us.
Seriously, it's like truly undeniable, and it's hard for me to imagine that people could hear that song and hear that music and not be touched. I mean, there would be something wrong if you don't find that beautiful. And for a convert, it's, to hear something incredible, beautiful, divine, like just in another level. It takes me to another place, and I think, you know, and people, you know, we were talking about this. You gave the Adan this past Friday, and it was just divine, you know, and it takes you to that primordial place. I think that's really what it comes down to, and I think that that is truly like the key, right, for what people are looking for. I mean, I feel like people are always searching, and they're looking for that primordial. So, I mean, I don't know, you asked me about my story. I'm sort of a little bit embarrassed to share it because after that you feel like I just want to be quiet and like crawl into, oh, just listen to it again. But I think unlike the both of you, my story was more like I had seen the depths of darkness, you know, and I was looking for something much better. And so much of it was, you know, my parents were immigrants, and they came, you know, with the idea of finding the American dream, and so I was very much raised with the idea that success meant material success, you know, and prestige, and, you know, good degrees, and, you know, the white picket fence, and, you know, the white husband, you know, and all of that. So it was a prototype. But according to that methodology, I felt very empty, and I felt very lost, and I felt like I made a lot of really bad decisions because they were based on, you know, on ego and materialism and everything that is basically superficial and lacking in meaning. So by the time I got to business school, which was part of that path, I felt like I was surrounded by, you know, like-minded people, but I felt, number one, that, you know, I had imposter syndrome. I felt like I don't know why I'm here because everybody else seems to have their act together, and I feel very lost. And then I met actually 2 Muslim classmates, and that's when I first was introduced to like Islam, and I thought to myself, well, maybe religion is what's missing from my life. And I had always believed in God, but not any organized faith, and my extended family were Christian, always trying to get, you know, my family to convert, but we never did. But I did, you know, I had an issue with Trinity. It made no sense to me, but I always believed in God. And so when I became interested, or, you know, I thought, okay, maybe Islam was something, I don't know, I went and checked out a book because you know, my classmates were nice enough, and I thought, okay, you know, interesting, they seem normal and nice, and maybe there's something I'm missing. And then I got into a habit of like reading, you know, a little bit from my book. It was The Religion of Islam by, I forget his name now. He was an Ahmadi, but it was...
Maulana Muhammad.
Yes, right, exactly.
I can't remember the full name, yeah.
Muhammad Maulana Ali.
Yeah.
So I would read a little bit, and then I would start talking to God, which is something I hadn't done in a long time. And I was surprised because as I was reading about like the theology, I was like, this is what I've always believed. And I think it's like tapping into that primordial, you know, like, okay, you need to be good, you need to be this, and it explained the whole question of Trinity for me in a way that I was like, yeah, of course, this is, you know, right. And then, you know, but my conversations with God were like, you know, it was like nothing for a while, you know, but I struggled with this idea of, okay, yeah, I love what I'm reading, but what's the catch? And I can't imagine that I'm a Muslim, you know. I mean, I knew I wasn't Jewish because I wasn't born Jewish. I knew I wasn't Christian because I didn't believe in Trinity, and so, okay, all that left for me was Islam. But no, how could I be Muslim? And what would my parents think? What would my friends think? And, you know, so I couldn't envision it. And so I always had this, like, voice in my head, yeah, but who are you kidding? You know, you're not Muslim, you know? How you can't be serious. And it changed for me one night when I went out with my business school friends, and we went to a bar, and we're partying and whatever. I came home, and for some reason I was really depressed and lost, and was crying, you know, to God. And, you know, by this time I had been doing this little ritual of talking to God and reading and stuff for, I don't know, 6 months or something. And then that night I remember like just hugging my pillow and feeling like just the depths of, you know, like sadness. And then in an instant I felt like, you know how you sort of viscerally feel empty and you just feel like nothing can make you feel better. All of a sudden I felt this like fullness, and I wasn't sad. And then I heard like in my heart, keep going, you're on the right track. which answered the question for me that you're not crazy, you know, and it wasn't like a welcome my child, you're fine, you're forgiven. It was more like, okay, I hear you, and I'm here, I'm listening, but let's see what you're gonna do, and you're not crazy, so keep going. And so I felt like that removed this stigma in my heart of, okay, yes, maybe I can be Muslim. And then it changed the whole trajectory of like, okay, now I'm actually interested in reading more with a different attitude. I wanted to feel what it was like to put my head on the floor for the first time, which was really odd, and I felt like, okay, I can do, I can at least start progressing on this path. And I think after that, it was still not another year or so till I actually took Shahada. But by the time I took Shahada, I fully believed in Islam. I fully, and so like the question of, well, were you Muslim? I wasn't praying, I don't think. Maybe I was, actually, I don't really remember. But I knew Islam was the truth, so it was kind of interesting. But the night that I converted, I went to this. I had moved. I'd graduated from business school. I was now working outside of Princeton, New Jersey, and I had signed up for this adult school class, and went to the teacher. It was like one of these, bring a different speaker every time, and I just wanted to meet people. So I was in a new environment, and so I went up after class and I said, I'm interested in Islam, and I'm wondering, if there's what the community is like here. So this very nice gentleman was like, who's this Asian woman? She's interested in Islam. Okay, let's call somebody. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to have a friend come meet you next week. And so the next week when I came, someone came, is like, someone in the community, and he came up to me after class and he was like, so I understand you're interested in Islam. Can I ask you a few questions? And I'm like, sure. And he said, so I wanted, do you believe in God? And I said, absolutely. And do you believe, in the angels and the books and, the prophets? And I'm like, yes. Asked me a few other things. Do you believe that Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet of God? And I said, yes, I do. He said, congratulations, you're a Muslim, and it's Ramadan.
Check, check, check.
Yes, tomorrow. And he's like, it's Ramadan tomorrow. You need to start fasting.
Wow.
And so I did.
And you did.
And I did. And it was like I'd reached the point. It wasn't like, whoa, no, I don't want to be Muslim. It was like,
I'd have waited till after Eid.
What's that?
I'd have waited till after Eid. Yeah, 11 months down here.
So you were ready to hear that.
I was ready. It was like I felt like God sent someone to just kick me over the finish line. And then so that was March 1st, 1994. That's my own date. So that's my story. And then and then alhamdulillah, so my first year, so I had never really been to a mosque before that. And so I was like, okay, time to meet my people. And so I went to the mosque, and of course, it was not at all what I expected. And, I was trying to, I don't know if you guys had this experience, but I know at that time for converts, you live a double life in a sense, because, I was in corporate America, and working my way in a job, and then at night I would put on my scarf and go be Muslim in the mosque, and people were telling me right away, you have to cover, you have to do this, that, and the other thing, and I was just wearing literally a shirt like this, and it's like, no, this is not modest. You have to cover, and you have to, and I was not going to show up at my corporate job the next day wearing a scarf. I couldn't do it. And then, I had about a year of hearing different kinds of things at the mosque that just didn't make sense, but I was so new to it, I couldn't, I was asking questions, but people don't want to hear, they don't want you to ask questions. And so I felt like, I was just playing sponge. And then a year after that, I went back to my high school reunion. I don't want to tell too many stories because I could talk forever, but I met a woman that I went to high school with, and she sent me the lecture tapes of Dr. Buffettle. And so that's how I was introduced to his thought. I started listening to those tapes, and then, fell in love with that approach and realized, this first year of being a Muslim was really spiritually oppressive. And I have to find out if this person is teaching, because this is the Islam that I came for. It's the Islam that, asks questions, forces you to think, what does God really want from us? What's reasonable for our life? What's ethical? What's beautiful? It's what we teach at Usuli, but that was my initial introduction to it. And so I was like, okay, I have to find this person. And I looked him up in the phone book. And he literally lived 10 minutes from me. Mm-hmm. And that's how we met. And then fast forward, that's how we ended up here. So
sorry if you said this and I misheard. How long, from the time you started thinking about Islam to the formal Shahada, how long was that period?
About 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
And that was when you were leading towards it, but there was a voice in your head saying, "What's
Yeah,
the catch?"
I mean, it started. Yeah, I think. So I remember like the first Thanksgiving of business school, and my Muslim friend said to me, "When you go home, are you going to drink wine with your parents? What happens if they try to serve you wine? You know, would they object if you didn't?" And I thought about that. It stuck with me. I went back for Thanksgiving, and then I didn't drink wine. And from that point, I never drank alcohol again. So that was my first year of business school. And then, yeah, so 2.5 years after that, then that sort of started the process of like thinking, reading, and whatever. So yeah, it was 2.5 years.
And was the resistance because of the image of Islam? You were reading the Maulana Muhammad Ali book, and you were
Mhm.
liking the doctrinal,
Mm-hmm.
but the kind of resistance was because of.
It was fear of what my parents would think, what my friends would think, and even just my own resistance to how could I see myself as a Muslim,
Yeah.
you know. And I remember just like being sure, like okay, I know I'm not Jewish because I wasn't born into Judaism and I'm not a chosen person. So and I don't think Jews really want people to convert into their faith. That was my thinking back then. And I'm like I know I'm a monotheist. I believe in one God. I'm not, so it's clear. It's either one of these three options. And then I remember like, okay, Christianity, again, the issue with Trinity, and I even like got into debates with like the evangelical on campus at Cornell, like, okay, what about what the Quran says? What about Islam? And he hadn't read the Quran, and so he was trying to argue with me about Islam, but never getting past the Bible. And so it's like, okay, you can't really address the things that the Quran raises. And so the rest of it was just like undoing that baggage.
Yeah.
And then at some point I reached a point where, my experience like after I converted was with my parents was really, really rough because my parents, I was an only child, and my mom was convinced that I just was going to be an oppressed woman. Like she started sending me articles about feminine genital mutilation, and she started sending me all these horrible like Islamophobic books, and so it got to the point that I had to cut relations with my family for like 8 years. But you reach a point where you're like, okay, I believe this is the truth. And I'm sorry you don't like it, but I know in my heart that it's the truth and I can't turn away from it because part of that truth means that there's an accountability at the end. And I can't tell God, oh, sorry, I'm not, I don't believe in you and I didn't want to become Muslim because my mom didn't like it. That was to me just not possible. And so it was very lonely because I couldn't talk to anybody about what I was going through. No one understood. And then it's like, okay, you arrive at this decision where you're a Muslim and then your entire family thinks you're insane. You have all of a sudden nothing in common with your friends because my friends were not interested in conversations about meaning of life and what happens they just weren't, and then I went through a period even where I thought, well, maybe what I'm looking for is connection with my cultural heritage because I was raised in a way where it was like not great to be Chinese, you'd rather be white, and so I thought, oh, maybe I should go back and reconnect with my Taiwanese friends. And then I did that. I actually made some friends. I made a group of friends, or met a group of friends, and they were really nice, but no one was interested in talking about meaning of life or afterlife. They were only interested in talking about what their parents did, what they ate for dinner, all the like cultural things. And I'm like, okay, this is not me. This is not what I'm looking for. I want something more than that. So it was almost a little bit of a process of elimination, and then it became like, no, this is it. And I, either I'm going to be Muslim or I'm not. And there's no turning back, because you're, and so if I have to go it alone, I have to go it alone, and that's, so that's what it was. And then, alhamdulillah, after meeting the sheikh, like all of the things that you encounter as a Muslim that you feel are like stupid or backwards or you just don't get it because it doesn't conform to any like sense of rationality. Alhamdulillah, I had someone I could ask, right? And he could explain to me, like, why do Muslims do this? Why do they think this? Why do they, not welcome, like, converts? Why do they not answer these questions? Why do they not know the answer to this question? Like, if I would say, I remember asking someone, okay, I keep being told I have to wear hijab, and that hijab is supposedly a protection. So what happens if you wear hijab and it makes you a target, and it increases your level of danger? And I would never get a reasonable answer to that. It was more like, oh, don't ask questions. This is an easy religion. This is black and white. And this is like very suffocating for someone who, you have a high level of curiosity, and you can understand things at a more sophisticated level, and you're like, I want to understand, because this is a choice that I've made, and I have to make it on intellectual and spiritual grounds. And so when the intellectual doesn't work, what are you asking me to accept? And so
Joe and I were talking about something similar before, how we said it's almost like you have this beautiful thing that you want, right? There's nothing, no doubt, no fear. This is what you want. But you can only get it paired with this really ugly thing.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, of course, after a while you start finding your little ways of just getting
You don't need the ugly part. You can actually just take the beautiful part.
But that's how it sometimes
Yeah.
it feels. Like, okay, so I can have this beautiful experience of being together with fellow Muslims and praying together. But if I want to have that experience, then I will get, let's see the balance. 3 people asking me, when did you convert?
Where's your scarf?
I mean, that's not like the ugly side, right? But yeah.
So what makes it all harder? Like, nobody warns you. You learn on the job. Like, and the benefit would have been if somebody just had taken me to the side and just said, "Oh, by the way, Joe, you're a convert now. Here's what you got to expect. You're going to be asked X, Y, Z. You may have all these assumptions that you make. I assume now I look back at myself, and I was naive. I now know that I was naive. But yeah, I was naive. I thought Muslims knew everything. I thought Muslims were open to asking questions.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't want to have a.
But is it naive because it's reasonable, right? You come at something and you learn, like, this is so beautiful. This makes so much. Of course, this must explain why people are Muslim.
Yeah.
Because this is what we're looking for, right? And so you imagine everyone who's Muslim understands that. Why wouldn't you think that?
It's that collision between ideal and reality.
Yeah.
And just knowing, like, if I knew somebody thinking of converting to Islam, it would be the first thing I tell them. Like, there will be a collision between ideal and reality.
Right.
But just because of the ugly reality, the ideal is the ideal.
Yeah.
Like, you believe in the ideal, and the ideal is truth, and you're on the right path. But just a heads up, you know.
You might have to go it alone.
There will be challenges. There will be. I mean, we've not really talked about our respective experiences once within
Let's do
the
that.
community. I mean, let's let Whiskey go, because I want to hear the triangle story.
I want to hear the triangle story. I haven't heard the triangle story.
Yeah, so once I had converted to Islam, I got acquainted with this wonderful woman. Her name is Saida Franca, and she has this foundation called Salam Art. And it's a foundation that aims at especially bringing art back to Islamic primary schools, but also just anything to help Muslim kids in their development with art. Really thinking that artistic expression can be such a valuable tool and such a valuable thing in human development. So we got acquainted, we started talking a bit, and she was working on children's books. So she makes wonderful illustrations and drawings. And we decided to team up, and I would be writing some of the texts for the children's books and some songs, and then she would be doing the drawings, and most of the concepts came from her as well. So there's this one series of books where the main characters are just geometrical shapes. So there's square, there's triangle, and there's circle. And so it's like an Islamic children's book, but not, I mean, not necessarily, because there were some Islamic children's books out there, but they were just very much straightforward. It's an Islamic children's book because it's the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam.
Right.
You know, beautiful. We have that. Okay, and let's see what else we can do with more of the themes that maybe require that aren't as straightforward as that. What other lessons can we talk about? So we did one book about friendship. We did a book about gratitude, and for there are some struggles whenever you're doing something artistic or. So of course, I mean, alhamdulillah, I think overall the books were rather well received within the Dutch Muslim community. I mean, of course, we made some precautions. So all of the songs I did are voice only, no musical instruments there. I mean, for some people it was easier that it was shapes rather than faces or actual human beings. But then there comes a moment where you feel like, okay, we've really tried to be inclusive with this children's book series, and then you get a comment asking, okay, but why aren't these figures properly Islamically dressed?
Oh my God.
Why isn't the triangle wearing a hijab?
Oh my God.
And you know, at such moments, alhamdulillah, thank God for people to laugh with.
Yeah.
No, really, thank
Yeah.
God, because I mean, also just the experience of sharing it with you and you laughing, that means so much to
Yeah.
me, because it
Yeah.
sort of validates that this is someone's opinion and they're
Yeah.
totally entitled to that. But I'm also totally entitled to saying that's not my Islam, right?
Exactly.
But when you're a new convert and you don't yet have that circle around you and someone tells you the triangle has to wear a hijab, then that's your answer from Islam. You just got
Exactly.
there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to struggle and find a way to make sense of that thing that maybe doesn't make sense to you. And
This is related but different, but it brings to mind, I think I had been Muslim for 2 weeks, and a friend at the time, Muslim, he just found out, because I didn't tell him because I was keeping it quiet, but he saw me in the mosque. So I told him, and he was like, great. We went out to get lunch, and the first thing he told me was which packet of chips in America, which packet of crisps I can and cannot eat. And that was the first bit of advice he
Yeah.
gave. Nothing about prayer, nothing about anything, nothing about just, oh, by the way, Joe, right now you can't eat these, but you can eat these because these aren't halal. It goes back to like what we were saying before about how the convert can be like shine a light on. It can be like how the convert just being the convert can be like a mirror to shine a light in the community. Like, what does that reveal
Yeah.
for this person's Islam?
Right.
Where's the hijab on that triangle? Or
Right.
what does it reveal for?
yeah, what are the things we find important?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. It's really, really indicative.
You know, one of the things that was the most powerful for my transition from that like kind of model of halal haram, you know, like everything has to be seen through this very simplistic halal haram prism. Like I remember when I converted, I went to the mosque and there were literally books, halal haram, of lists of products that were just halal haram. And I mean, it's just like suffocating. But I like when I met, you know, the professor, I really felt like he had to give me permission to use my brain. And it was a thing, you know, it was like, no, it's okay, you should use your intellect. You know, God gave you an intellect. But I feel like this is what's so suffocating about the convert experience oftentimes is you're told immediately almost not to use your intellect at all because it's so simple. All you have to know is what is halal and haram, and that's what's going to get you to Jannah, right? I mean, it's almost like a mathematical equation. But this is not the thinking, obviously, that's going to allow Muslims or Islam to contribute anything to humanity, right? And so, I mean, hopefully, like, I would love to ask you guys, okay, now looking back on your experience, and you start to answer the question, like, what would you advise a convert that's starting on this journey? Like, you know, you've had your own experiences with with stupidity and ignorance and backwardsness and racism and, you know, like, and, you know, we certainly get so much mail from different people that you can tell from what they write. They're so smart. They're, you know, they've read so much. They're so thoughtful, so empathetic, and yet, and also very polite, right? Because I think as converts, you're polite. You sort of feel like I'm the last to the party. Who am I to impose myself or say anything? I'm not going to correct anybody. You know, I respect that everyone has their own journey, but other people don't see you that way, right? I mean, they have no problem coming up and telling you, no, this is wrong. You can't do this. You should do that, blah, blah, blah. But how do you then advise, like, these newbie converts that are in that same boat to trust their intellect, trust their senses? You know, what would you say?
Do you want to go first? I think you just said the word there, trust. So, I mean, the question was, what advice would you give? I could think of two, but first, you just said, trust yourself. Because you got yourself to this process. Like, you got yourself to this place. It's you that got you to this. And the second, though, you come out, as we've used, the second you're going to be subject to the gaze of others. People are going to project, both within and outside the community. Your friends and your family are going to see you differently. Within the community, they're going to see you differently. You're going to be enter a world, a Muslim world that you're not aware of. Now I know, like, Muslim issues. I didn't know any. Trust yourself. You are your own anchor. And of course, you know, and it's so easy, but it's also the hardest thing. You know, when there's winds blowing left and right about halal, haram, triangles, hijab, crisps, marriage proposals left and right. Trust yourself. You got yourself here. Secondly, conversion is a process. It's not a one-off act. I think we've kind of alluded to this before. The journey doesn't stop after the Shahada.
Yeah.
The education doesn't stop. You're going to learn a lot about yourself. You're going to learn a lot about Muslims. You're going to learn a lot more about Islam. Yes, you're now Muslim, but that faith is fragile. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be developed. The journey to being a real Muslim, if only it was Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Muhammad. It's a lifetime.
Yeah.
So go easy on, trust yourself, but go easy on yourself. Don't be too harsh on yourself. And it's a process. It's a lifelong journey. Because sometimes, you know, we try and, some converts, and I don't want to paint too broad a brush, but I perceive in my interactions with other kind of convert groups a little bit of a kind of, we need to make up for lost time kind of thing. You know, we need to be really Muslim, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not my cup of tea.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Just thinking of what I could add.
I mean, for me, I think that education is so important. It's the only antidote to all the stupidity that you'll come across. And that if things don't make sense, to suspend judgment until you do more research, more prayer, more reflection. And then, you know, I always love, you know, obviously I would recommend all of Dr. Abul-Fadl's books, but Search for Beauty in Islam, the Conference of the Books, is particularly important because it tells a lot of human stories, but it gives you this very powerful heuristic, which is, if it's beautiful, you know, we know God is beautiful and God loves beauty. And so by definition, if something is ugly, morally ugly, ethically ugly, you know, no one has to describe what beauty versus ugliness is. But if you recognize something is ugly, it cannot be by definition of the divine. And that's like, you know, you don't need to read a gazillion books for that to kick in and say, okay, if someone's treating, you know, me this way or telling me this about Islam or saying this about whatever, and this is Islamic, you know, use that internal, you know, litmus test. Is it beautiful or is it ugly? And then let that be your guide. And if you're not sure, then just reserve judgment until you have more information. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, whatever it is you were doing that got you here, keep on it. Again, goes back to trusting yourself. You're doing you. You're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Also, like, I'm sure that we've alluded to it all in the conversation. Yeah, it's not easy. Conversion, particularly to Islam, in this day and age, conversion itself is a major rupture of life to anything.
Yeah.
Conversion to Islam in this day and age is not easy. It is a challenging path, but it's a meaningful path. It's a purposeful path. Just by converting, you have shown yourself to be someone who's prepared to kind of go in a direction you probably never expected your life would ever go. That takes bravery. That takes courage. That takes openness. Pat yourself on the back. Well done. I guess it's all an elaboration on just trusting yourself.
But also, I think building a relationship with God, right? Because when you recognize that this is a really lonely path, and that it may very well be that it's just you and God, the more you can do to just, develop that relationship, talk to God, like literally 24/7, right? Just keeping that connection open and inviting God into everything, front and center. Then I feel like that relieves so much of the fear and the loneliness, because you don't have to even explain, because God saw everything that just happened. God heard that conversation. God knows what you're feeling and what you experienced, and you're not ever alone in that way. And that's such a source of comfort and strength and anchor when especially everything around you is just darkness.
Yeah, I think maybe I feel like sometimes there's a pressure, or there's this idea that there's one way to be Muslim, and that's the mold you have to fit now that you've decided to be Muslim.
Yeah.
Like, don't let whatever someone's idea is of Islam, don't let that eradicate who you are. Let Islam elevate who you are, not destroy it. Those things that make you, your great sense of humor, that can stay. Please let it stay.
Yeah.
That silly hobby,
Especially now.
let it stay.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there's things that are just immoral to do. I mean, of course, yeah, gotta work on it, find a different way to challenge it, or to channel it. But it breaks my heart to see exceptional people turned completely standard and
Yeah.
flattened by converting.
Exactly.
How could that be beautiful?
Exactly.
Because it can add so much depth to whatever strengths we already have, and just give it purpose.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And and coming back to sort of my original working hypothesis that when God selects each of us, and each of us has a gift that can propel the community forward, obviously Muslims have to nurture and help and support that. But in the event they don't, it's like I really, converts just have to find it within themselves to keep going and do that. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about if you were in charge and you know that Muslims are supposed to be at the forefront of everything: change, beauty, social justice, music, science, art, ideas. What would you want to see converts or Muslims, be doing differently, right? I mean, because I always feel that converts are on the receiving end, as opposed to feeling like they can be on the offensive and on the creative, energy, and what should we do, guys? What should we feel empowered, enlightened to do? And just to say, Witzke, your adhan, your music, and also we should talk about your scholarship too, because you're about to go tackle, a PhD or SJD program, which is, a doctorate in law, on the topic of Islam and climate change and nature. I mean, what more do we need at this time, in our moment of the world than that? And, that to me is amazing. And Joe, you already have your PhD, and you are ready to ignite the world with, you know, powerful ideas and, you know, producing books and whatever. You know, I mean, it's like, this is a testament to, you know, your artistry. And so, I mean, alhamdulillah, it's your baby. But you know, I'm not sure quite how to articulate this question, but you know, I feel like God is unleashing us, right, to do what we were put on this earth to do, and yet oftentimes we're held back. So, what would you love to do, and what would you love to see, like, converts do? You know, or I'm not sure if I'm asking the right question, but like maybe another way of asking it is, what would you tell converts, exceptional converts, to encourage them to, you know, explode on the scene and do what they need to do? What was it for you that empowered you?
Let's imagine completely hypothetically, there's a Dutch convert called Whiskey who has a musical talent.
Yeah.
What I want to see is a convert embracing Islam and thinking, okay, Islam tells me that this talent isn't random nor happenstance. This talent came from somewhere. Islam forces me, I don't like the word using, forces me, but now that I'm Muslim, I have to do something with this. The skills that I have, the talents I have, need to be harnessed and elevated. And I see all of that as part of fulfilling my relationship with Allah. If every Muslim, not just convert, saw it that way, the world changes.
In relation to how that obligation and that relationship with God and that essence of being a Muslim goes so incredibly far beyond the rituals.
Yeah.
Of course.
Because I feel like that is where so much gets stuck.
Yeah.
That
Of course.
So indeed, to see this major talent in, I don't know, the exact sciences as a way in which you can fulfill your ibadah, in which you
Yeah.
can fulfill your worship and your responsibilities, right?
Like, absolutely, ritual is necessary, of course, but it's not sufficient. Like,
Mhm.
anywhere, like, it could be music. I mean, Whiskey just mentioned the example of when people convert to Islam and then they drop it.
Mhm.
You can have this talent, and your conversion to Islam could mean, well, music's haram, so I'm not going to use this anymore. It can be, you know what, now that I'm Muslim, I see this differently. I need to be the very best musician,
Exactly.
or philosopher, or scientist, or writer, or teacher, because that's how I understand Islam.
Right.
That's what I would want to see. People seeing Islam that way.
Absolutely.
That's the
100%.
Asuli. That's basically, I'm just paraphrasing that.
It's, yeah, absolutely. It's being the best version of yourself. It's,
Yeah.
you know, it's figuring out, you know, we always say there's no coincidences. Why were you put here? What are you good at? What are you not good at? What is your gift? What's your talent? What's your superpower? Because I do believe everyone has a superpower. They may not know what it is. So part of your job is figuring out what is your superpower, and then how can I use it to be, you know, to be the best version of myself, but also to serve God and elevate humanity. You know, and especially in a time like now where everywhere around the world, Muslims are the ones that are in concentration camps, getting, you know, destroyed, decimated in, you know, losing their homes, losing their country. I mean, all of that. It's like, okay, we need our best people, our best efforts, our best minds to like go all out, right? So how can we just sit and be focused on our own ritual and worry about whether we've got a hair coming out of our scarf, God forbid, or that, you know, our music is, you know, is the female, you know, aura that we're displaying. I mean, it's like I want to include the adhan on this recording because when you tap into that primordial, like, part of your soul, it unleashes something. And it makes all that stuff seem stupid.
Can I share a poem that I think it came out of that feeling? this feeling of, no, I'm not going to introduce it further. The world tries to bend me, conform to its norms, commoditize and spend me, reduce me to my forms. But I will not bow, and I will not bend. Not then and not now, so go on, offend. Shoot me down word by word, drag my all through the dirt, make a scene just to hurt as a means to be heard. You think you can shake me with your hateful offense? You think you can break me with just those two hands? Have you seen the pillar upon which I stand? My only fulfiller, majestic and grand. He who straightens my spine and straightens my path, with his love divine leaving no trace of wrath. He who always is here, needing slumber nor sleep. He who always is near as I laugh and I weep. Being in his presence, my body stands tall. To him turns my essence, whatever may fall, whatever be done. I know my heart will thrive, for he is the one who has written my life. Like, don't ever let anyone or anything get in the way of that. I feel like both from the Muslim community, from outside of the Muslim community, there's going to be pressure, and it's I mean, we've been talking about the wonderful experience, but also about the pain, you know? Sometimes it's just rough. My second Ramadan, I was attacked in Jerusalem on a Friday. And I seriously struggled with the question, how can anyone, if a follower of God who just met his creator on Jummah prayer in Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem on a Ramadan, on a Friday, do that, how then can it be true? There's gonna be lows and real low lows and that's all a part of the process. But it can't break you. It could never break you. And don't let it break you. I think that's you're in charge.
It's so beautiful. Thank you for. This is the second poem I've heard from you that is just. It takes you to that primordial place, and like. It's just profound and deep and beautiful, and it's divine. And it reminds me of when God says that God will never give you more than you can handle. Like, so many times that has carried me through really, really difficult situations where you just want to crawl into a hole and just wish you were never born, and then it's like, no, you can't give yourself the luxury of that. And that you can handle it somehow. And that poem just affirms the beauty.
Classic whiskey, just dropping poems.
I know, right? Like,
I don't know.
your other poem, that was truly, I mean, all of them.
They don't come out of nowhere.
No, but
They
like,
come from-
we didn't know. Yeah.
But okay, so this again proves my point about the utter beauty of Islam, right? I mean, I feel like, sometimes we get these comments on YouTube, which are really hateful. It's like, oh, how can you speak intelligently about a religion that, does X, Y, and Z, which is so whatever. Okay, and it's such a hateful comment and it's such an ignorant comment. And then when you go clear to the other side and you say, look at these exceptional converts that can reach like primordial beauty through poetry. Like, I've never understood poetry, and I think the two poems that you've read like just melt me inside. Like, I didn't even think I could, I just think it was not a language that I could understand. And then to take you to a different place and humble you is such a gift, and it's inspired obviously by your relationship with your faith. And this, thank you guys, this is really the part that I wanted to share and get to in this conversation, because I don't think this is what people ever imagine converts are or talk about or think about. And I feel like it's such a shame, because this is what brought us together in a most beautiful way. This is what brings people. This is the hope for the future if people are looking for something beautiful, you know.
It's the point we talked about last night after the halakha, where like see yourself as not as a pioneer. As a pioneer. You know, what were you saying? Like, we talk as if India was always Muslim. It wasn't always Muslim. You know, or Uzbekistan wasn't always Muslim. Turkey or West Africa. You know, these places became Muslim, entered the house of Islam through converts. It's converts that replenish a faith.
Yeah.
So when we talk about converts, we're not just talking about individuals. We're talking about the start of a lineage. You know, like my family is Linhoff, Taylor. I'm sure if you look at the family tree, there's no Muslims there, like, at all. Like, I'm the first.
Right.
But my kid, so that will be a born Muslim. It'll be a born Muslim Linhoff, you know, for the first time.
Right.
So when you invest in a convert, you're not just investing in an individual, you're investing in generations.
Yeah.
Of the potential.
Yeah.
For generations, the potentiality there you're investing in, and which is also the tragedy, the disaster when people convert to Islam. They have so many negative experiences, and then their sense of Islam kind of dies out, or they even leave. You've not just lost an individual, no, you've lost a lineage.
Right.
You've lost generations of potential Muslims.
Right.
I did the example I used, it was, maybe I'll do nothing, maybe my kid will do nothing, maybe my grandkid will do nothing, but great grandkid, that could have potentially been a Muslim superstar.
Yeah.
And it's lost.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So see yourself as that, as kind of standing on the shoulders of a real pioneer.
Yeah. But see, they'll always have this book edited by Joseph Linhoff, and they'll be, see, that was my great grandfather. I've got to live up to the, you know, or like your music and your poetry, right? Because it's honestly, it's shocking, right? And it's shocking because you don't expect such beauty to come from a book, right? Like, people who are used to hearing khutbahs that will put them to sleep and have nothing relevant to say other than all the things you've always heard, you know, regurgitated at every other khutbah. And now you have a book that you read and every single page is like new information that's empowering and enlightening and is relevant to our world and speaks to you. I mean, that's your artistry, is when you read it and it jumps off the page and it goes straight to your heart. Because you took it from someone, you know, from a scholar who spoke it, but it's a completely different thing to take spoken word and turn it into written word and have that jump off the page and grab your heart and then, you know, like, make you change your everything, your thinking, you're giving permission. Like, here's the role model, here's the example of what we should be called to do. And it's unlike anything you've ever heard anywhere. Like, that's exciting. And, you know, the reviews we've gotten on that are stunning. And then to hear music, like, you know, someone wrote on our YouTube, this caught me off guard, like, the adhan was so beautiful, and honestly, it was, like, shocking in the most beautiful way. Like, it almost wakes you up and go, oh, what was that? Where did that just take me? And, like, okay, this is what it's going to take, right? Like, complete mic drop moments at every turn. So Suli Records, here we come.
Whiskey, your poem made me
Oh my
break
god.
my watch.
Oh my god.
You owe me a watch.
Don't sue me. I know this is America.
This wasn't no cheap watch. I want to send you the bill.
I think the guitar came with a rubber band. Can find a new use for that.
Oh my gosh. Okay, and so
Did you break it with just those two hands? Oh, sorry, that was a reference to the poem, but you don't know it by heart yet.
No, sorry, Whiskey, I'm not going to memorize.
we will if we publish it. Poetry, we want to do a
You know
poetry
what? That
book.
would be. How many
Yeah.
poems do you have?
I don't know. I really don't.
Would you want to publish them?
Maybe.
You
So
have
I don't.
to. It's a duty now. It becomes a duty.
So the thing is, I feel like I don't like poems that are written down. That's my problem mostly. So I had been thinking, because what we're doing with the children's books is we're just printing the book and then there's a QR code so they can listen to it.
Okay.
So maybe
could
thinking
do
about
that,
something like
yeah.
that. But so
Yeah.
maybe.
Inshallah. Could I trouble you to close this chapter, this session, with your freedom song, your
Oh,
why
gosh.
song, which is, you know, this is the very first song I ever heard you play on YouTube, and it struck me not just for like the beauty of the melody, but the power of the words, and it's to me Islamic, humanistic, but in the most primordially beautiful way. I think we have a new term, because a lot of times it's like it's not enough just to say it's beautiful or it's humanistic, because
You need to get deeper.
it's something really divine and deep and recognizable, and the only way you can really capture all of that is primordial. It's like divinely primordial and beautiful. So this was a song for me, and represents the hope of what this generation of converts can do, because I feel like so much of what is Islamic, you listen to it or you read it, it feels very medieval, it feels very foreign, it feels like unrelatable. But this is something that is not just relatable, but inspiring and uplifting and enlightened and elevated, you know, and that's what I feel like converts can bring with their gifts. So this is like encapsulates it beautifully. Thank you.
You know, it's gotten. I really struggled. I used to struggle with. I still struggle sometimes because I get afraid when people give me compliments that it's just this. I get afraid that I will get too attached to compliments or something.
Okay. Whiskey, you're absolutely terrible.
Thank you. So, but I actually, honestly, it's been throughout Usuli, throughout being here, I've come to realize whilst listening to what you're saying is, and it's so beautiful because the parts that people are complimenting, they're not my parts. No, but they're like the part of it that wasn't from me, right?
Yeah.
So like the feeling you got, or the so alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Thanks. I agree with the compliment. Yeah, I need to play through it because it's been a while.
You're channeling the divine.
And I just exactly, of course. I'm not just a mediocre guitarist. Okay. Empty words spoken without meaning, they just fade away. Beautiful words if you can feel them, but they do not contain. Freedom is the label of some feelings that words could never reach. And just the word itself is senseless if you can't fulfill what it means. Oh, when we can follow the birds in the brightest skies to wherever, whoever we want. When life is no longer lived by the eye, but by the guiding light of our hearts, that's when, oh, when freedom will make sense. That's when, oh, when. Never should we forget the ones who brought us here. We should honor what they have left, or it will disappear. But freedom is easier to worship when it is out of reach, though it can only truly exist when it's there for all in need. Oh, when we all stop fighting our selfish wars, and nobody's afraid to stand out, when every woman can safely leave her front door, and the children can run in the park, when we can follow the birds in the brightest skies to wherever, whoever we want. When life is no longer lived by the eye, but by the guiding light of our hearts, that's when, oh, when freedom will make sense. That's when, oh, when we all stop shouting and listen to hear what the meaning of love truly is. When we open the borders of prejudice and fear, and let our hearts guide our minds for a bit, that's when, oh, when freedom will make sense. That's when, oh, when.
Amazing. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Thank you guys. Thank you. This was amazing and to be continued, inshallah.
That was
Inshallah.
almost 2 hours.
Wow, didn't feel like it.
5 minutes?
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا